What's going on, everyone? Travis Brown, Robert Cessna, the Eagle, here at Kyle Field. Texas A&M just beat Arkansas 42-31 in what was one of the more lopsided affairs between these two teams. Cease, first, let's just go and get your takes. But I know my takes, so don't lay too heavily in it, is Kellen Mond. But other than Kellen Mond, what stood out to you in this game?
I like the way that A&M bounced back after falling behind 7-0. This is 3 home games. The other team scored every time first. And you'd say, like, A&M needs to quit doing that. Any team doesn't want the other team to score first. But I like the way they came back, and by the end of the third quarter, this game was over. Total domination by A&M. And it's kind of funny because I didn't think the defense played that well. When it was all said and done, I thought Arkansas shot themselves in the foot a few times. But I never thought after the first quarter that Arkansas was going to win. I thought A&M was just too good, and I actually was surprised Arkansas kept scoring. You like Mon. I liked everything about the offense, starting with the offensive line. And I'm finally going to give the offensive line some props. Even though they held a few times today, I watched Barry Odom bring pressure from different people, but it didn't matter what he did. A&M's offensive line did well, which allowed Mon to play well, which allowed Akne, or whatever that guy's name is, to play well when he got in. Spiller, Ezekiel Jones looks great. Wiedemeyer looks great, but it all starts up front.
Jones? Who's Ezekiel Jones?
Ezekiel, well, yeah.
Hezekiah Jones. Okay, just making sure we were talking.
I did say the right name there.
Yes. So before we move on to other things, let's be sure to throw out there that if you're watching on Facebook Live, if you're watching on Periscope, we'll give this guy a pass. It's his birthday today. So everyone, if you're watching on Periscope and Facebook,
15 more minutes.
Wish him a happy birthday. But also, if you want to join in the conversation, have any questions, want to give your thoughts or comments, go ahead and fire those in there, and we'll get the great Alex Miller to read those out. So my biggest take of the game was I honestly actually believe that this was probably Kellen Mond's best game of his career, only because it was his most accurate. He completed 81% of his passes.
80.8.
Which was the highest he had. The previous highest was like 76, and that was against Texas San Antonio. Before that, it was 73% against Mississippi State last year. And then before that, there's a huge drop-off. So by far one of his most accurate games. 202 passer rating, 202.8 passer rating was the highest. His previous was 202.4 against Mississippi State last year. Just was in command of the offense the entire game. To me, and I asked about this, and of course they were really bite. To me, this looks like a guy who's playing with a chip on his shoulder. There had been some critiques. There had been some offseason stuff that happened. It really seems like he is a more confident version of himself, and a guy who's kind of going out there to kind of prove everyone wrong. That's, again, my opinion on this. Cease, I will go out on the limb and say I think this was Kellen Mond's best performance in Aggie land.
Well, it's just hard for me to say because I thought the Clemson game was great, even though they lost. I thought he just was on fire that day against Clemson. And what I think is funny about Mond is, without a doubt, a great game, but still he threw 2 passes that probably could have been intercepted. I don't think should have been intercepted. The first one went right through 2 guys. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, you need to be lucky because his 2 picks in return for touchdowns this year, I don't give him a lot of credit for it because the offensive player should have defected one. The other one, he got a low snap. It was a deal. But getting back to what your premise said, I loved his decisions. But the one time on like 3rd and 12, and he hit Wiedemeyer, I thought that was probably like his 3rd read that the offensive line gave him credit, but he was smart enough to go through the reads 1, 2, 3. And I'm laughing. If that was last year, he'd have been on his butt. That line couldn't have kept anybody out. And I think we're seeing, and we said this last year, we didn't think Mon was the problem. A lot of us didn't think Mon was the problem last year. I thought the offensive line was the biggest problem. And you work hand in hand. And I'm with you. Mon looked great. And how much is that reflection of people around him? Only the coaches really can answer that, and they won't answer it till like 8 years later until he's gone. But I liked the way he darted the ball.
Mhm.
I liked when they went one time, like you knew they were going to run the ball, and they didn't. They faked it, and they threw one of those passes to Wiedemeyer. And the play calling was even a little bit better tonight. I guess better is not the word, a little more daring, because I actually thought Spiller might run the ball more, but they love throwing the ball to Hezekiah Jones. And you can see why. Is it me, or I felt like he's been in the offense for like 80 games in a row the way they used him. Every time they're throwing the ball to number 9.
Right. I mean, that was a huge boost back. Going back to your offensive line statement too, we listened to the broadcast in our ear while we're watching the game. And there was one time that one of the commentators, and I don't know their names off the top of my head, said that called A&M's offensive line one of the best in the country, which anybody can argue back and forth, but just even to hear that after what this offensive line was the last 2 years is comical, but they are playing extremely well. And as someone who might not have seen that progression and seen last year and kind of how they've moved through the season this year, they do look like a really good offensive line.
Well, and the beauty of that is what we're seeing is, and to me, and I think we all talked about it, is you talk about the pieces coming in place. They lose Chapman, so now you get Jones back. They're 3 deep at running back all of a sudden. We know they've got a SEC type tight end. Chase Lane, I don't want to call him chopped liver because he's not. He had 5 catches. He probably only had 6 or 7 targets. I mean, what do you want from the guy? I mean, you only have so many footballs to go around. And after they didn't score,
Chase Lane actually only had 3 catches.
Oh, 3 catches, excuse me. Yeah, it was Jones, Wiedemeyer, and Smith. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was getting my guys. But the deal there also is when you look at that, you know, those 3 guys, and then you throw him in, like I said, you're right, he's only at 3 for 50 because those first 3 guys had never mind. I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. Take me.
Well, let's go to Alex Miller, our man on the streets of College Station, or really in his home at College Station. You watched the broadcast. You got to get a little more in depth on what they were showing on the TV. What did you see from your perspective, and what stood out as some of the keys to A&M success today?
I think the biggest thing was A&M just took care of business. You know, we heard all week. Arkansas was the talk of the country. It seemed like all week of how Sam Pittman has turn this team around and they've started to right the ship and they're going to play A&M. Can they get a big win on the road? And A&M, they weren't playing any games tonight. You know, they took care of business. The defense, yeah, they struggled, but in the middle stretch of that game, they came up with some big stops. You know, Tyree Johnson's sack at the end of the first half, making Arkansas settle for the field goal. You know, at the start of the second half, A&M got a couple of punts on defense. And then the offense went back right down the field and scored, and they built a 42-17 lead in the third quarter. I mean, at the end of the game, A&M only won by 11, but it really wasn't that close. No. You know, it was never in doubt that A&M was going to win the game. And so, you know, I think that's the biggest thing, because Arkansas has kind of been a side in A&M's thorn the last few years, where that's a game A&M should have won handedly, and A&M didn't let Arkansas hang around like they have in recent years. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I took away from tonight.
Let's get a pull quote from that Alex Miller thing. Aside in A&M's thorn.
And
thorn in A&M's side.
There you go. He'll get that at Bible study next week. He'll get that right. But you know, A&M didn't have any turnovers. But you touched on it, Alex. I want to bring up 4 sacks. 2 of them led to missed field goals, and 1 of them led to a punt. So you could say no turnovers, but there's 3 defensive plays that turned into no points in A&M's favor. And when A&M had 6 possessions in a row, 6 touchdowns. No, don't even have to bring Seth Small out there. I expected A&M to have 2 or 3 field goals this time. You know why? Because I felt they'd get in a position and they'd be conservative. They'd run Spiller or whatever. So I want to give the coaching staff credit on the game plan, because they went for the throat this time. They didn't go down there, okay, you know, we don't want to do it. They used everyone. And when it was over and I'm grading the specialties, I said, That's right. A&M didn't kick a field goal. I mean, they didn't have to kick a field goal. And I love the way Jimbo, when fans, whatever, when you hear his post-game comments, he talked about that they didn't put the game away. And I want to say, well, Jimbo, you didn't call plays from to put them away. You were vanilla at that point.
Yeah.
You were able to get your foot off the accelerator, which is great. And then he says, well, I'd like us to finish them off. When you're running between tackles in the SEC, you're not going to add a lot of consolation touchdowns.
Arkansas, like we said, was able to move the ball, 461 yards total offense. Felipe Franks runs the ball for the most yards in his career,
that was interesting.
91. Raheem Boyd picks up 100 in the game, the former A&M running back. But for all those yards, the key defensively and the key offensively for A&M was third downs. Arkansas 3 of 11 from third down. On third down, A&M 7 for 11 on third down. And like Jimbo Fisher said, there was a drop. It probably should have been 8 for 11 offensively for A&M. That third down defense really made the difference.
Yeah, and if we had Mike Elko in here with us right now, he goes, "Hey guys, I wanted to make sure Boyd didn't beat us, Burks didn't beat us. We said if Felipe Franks wants to run, let him run." And we saw a few times he couldn't run with anybody around. He fell down and fumbled one time.
Monster.
And so once again, it was tough when you sit back and I looked at this and I go, this is like 2 home games in a row. I'm saying to myself, well, A&M's defense has got to get a lot better. But then I go, if that offense continues to get better, it will not need to get a lot better. You just need to have 1 or 2 more scores at the end of the game than the other team. And I laughed at Travis when it was all said and done. I go, wait a minute. If you're a gambler, you didn't like the ending of this game because the line was anywhere from like 10.5 to 12.5, and it ended up being 11. And it really, to me, I felt this was like a 21-point win, a 28-point win. This game was over.
For as much as Vanderbilt felt like a terrible loss, this felt like a much better win for A&M fans. Let's talk about my one biggest critique on there, and it's something that didn't really come back to bite them as much today, but will in the future. Some real kind of bonehead mental mistakes on the defensive side of the ball. You have several kind of personal fouls, several holding calls mess things up. You have a situation where Arkansas runs out there, and I don't really know if it was Arkansas was really kind of confused on the play or if they were purposely making it confusing. But that 1 4th down play where they switched and they moved people around, and A&M's defense didn't kind of really know where to line up. Next thing you know, they bombed it down the field and they ended up scoring a touchdown on it. And then you talk about the Tyree Johnson sack. He goes down and gets that sack, and the entire defensive line is celebrating in the backfield when Arkansas is lining up to try to go for it on 4th down, and the A&M's sideline is having to tell them to get back to play. And we didn't ask about this, but it seemed like they had to burn a timeout there to try and get everyone on the same page, because the defensive line just got lined up. They didn't even get a play call in. And they take a timeout, and Arkansas ends up kicking a field goal or attempting a field goal in that position. But had they not gotten that timeout in, it was another situation where Arkansas was going to have a 4th down play and A&M didn't have a play called.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because in all games, particularly night games, when everybody's doing everything on deadline, you forget a lot of things.
Right.
And in a game your team you're covering, you win, you do forget about those things, because you're writing about, obviously, we don't want to go like, oh, they could have lost F. You don't say that, which you bring up a good point, because he's right. We do listen to the game, and I just expected Arkansas to do something on that 4th down play, do something real small, pick up the 1st down. And the announcer said you could tell Franks audibled, and he saw the one-on-one and he wanted to go deep, which is not a high percentage play, And I'm saying to myself, okay, would Alabama do that? If you're playing in a game where someone could win, like let's say next week, the game's on the line at South Carolina or maybe Tennessee in 2 weeks, Arkansas has nothing to lose. And I say that even the game, no one expects Pittman to win any games. He's always run 2. So you can do stupid things like that, because if that had been incomplete, I would have said, what's Arkansas thinking? Because A&M going to go right down and score again. And then I'm with you when A&M was running people in and out. And they could, I thought they were going to try. I thought they might even get a penalty on that one because of substitutions. And those will be things we need to maybe ask Jimbo on Monday that he might bring up himself, be disappointed in. But you're right; those are things that could beat you in a high-scoring game. If this had been 45-42, we might have been really ripping that because that was like a 35-yard play,
right?
Pass.
Or a game with turnover, and compounded with that, a lot of the holding, a couple of pass interference calls, a couple of holding or calls that went against Leon O'Neal, a guy who he's a high risk, high reward kind of player, where he goes out and makes some really great plays for A&M, but also has collected quite amount of flags this year, and then usually tends to have a little bit of a hiccup play after he takes one of those bad penalties.
Well, you brought that up because, and I thought we might even see less of them. And when they called the penalty on Miles Jones, he ran right over the official's face, and I'm kind of laughing to myself. That's how you get another 15 yards.
Right.
And I mean, I know they're right down near the goal already, but didn't he learn from that? Even if the official messes up, you got to let him mess up. You can't do two mess ups and give him 15 yards. When I saw him run right over the official, I'm thinking like, what is the deal?
And he has gotten personal fouls earlier in the year for situations kind of similar to that. So it'll be interesting. We saw a little bit more Keldrick Harper after that. And then we also have to mention that, again, these things like Antonio Johnson as a guy who has filled in that position, also plays nickelback, played him a little bit more nickelback today until he got that targeting call. And he'll miss a half at South Carolina. I know we mentioned it before. There's a lot to talk about today because it was a pretty great game for the Aggies. We mentioned it briefly before, but Ezekiel Jones, a.k.a. Hezekiah Jones, made his return today. It was it's one of those things that kind of had slipped my mind. It was the first time he had caught a ball since I believe it was like November 8th, 2018.
October. I went back and looked up Mississippi State, October 2018. 2 years, more than 2 years.
Because he had an injury that kept him out all of last season, and then he had a leg injury that kept him out the first 4 games of this season. And for me, and I know we talked about this before, you could just kind of sense the excitement in Kellen Mond's voice when he mentioned that he had been practicing and was going to be back, because there are times where it seemed like Kellen Mond is kind of the old grandpa having to deal with the grandkids who don't necessarily run the best routes or still learning how to be wide receivers. And there's probably some frustration there. And it kind of felt like he had someone to commiserate with and someone who knew the playbook. And he went right to him and went to him pretty often today. And like you said, it didn't seem like he really missed a beat. He had 5 catches for 47 yards along of 15, 8 targets. He tied with Weidemeyer with the most targets with 8.
And I don't know if one of those targets was pass interference call. Does that count as a target or not a play? Because they threw the ball to him and it was pass interference. So that wouldn't count as a target.
It's a no play, then it's a no play.
So in other words, they threw the ball his way 9 times right off the bat. And you're right, Travis. I'm sitting there like, man, this guy's like his long lost cousin Vinny. I mean, he's throwing it to him every time. And I guess as we go forward, that made Wiedemeyer even more effective because he looked like he had more one-on-one coverage than we've seen him have in a while.
And the interesting thing, and I've looked up the SEC StatCat on his website, Weidemeyer averages his catches like 15 plus yards. He is the deepest threat that A&M has this year. And he kind of proved that again tonight. And when you have a guy like Hez Jones, that seam route, the middle of the field, especially at distance, is gonna, you would think, be a little bit more open.
One thing that Jimbo touched on is, when I agree with him 100%, this offense was so good tonight, it overcome back-to-back holding penalties.
Yeah.
When the game was still on the line. Usually one holding penalty is the kiss of death of a drive, let alone overcoming 2. And that to me, that tells you how good the offense was tonight, because you can't overcome 2 because Arkansas had to feel so good both times, and then A&M scores. I'm thinking like, wow.
Have to throw out, just kind of rolling through things. Buddy Johnson, 12 total tackles.
Who's your buddy?
11 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. I mean, that is an all-time kind of performance as well for A&M's star linebacker on defense. A little bit of a bright spot there on defense.
I know Alex centered in on Jones because how could you not to of what he did coming back, and I thought he was just a big cog tonight for the whole offense.
Mhm.
Well, and one thing that I think of, we had kind of we've been wondering when Hezekiah Jones would come back and what kind of impact he would have. And sometimes you talk about these guys and they come back, but they're really not that impactful to the team. And that was not the case with Jones. I mean, he went in there, like we said, and I mean, he was in there the whole game. He stepped in, he took in that starting role. We didn't see as much Cam Brown, I think, as we normally have this season. And so I think it really shows how important Hez Jones is to that team. He's the oldest scholarship player at receiver they have, losing Cam Buckley and Jamon Osborne and Caleb Chapman. And so, yeah, having kind of that veteran guy with a little bit of savviness to him, I mean, that gives A&M a boost on offense.
And guys, we got to talk about halfway. They're 4-1. I mean, there's nobody left they won't be favored to beat. They have 2 more games here at home, and obviously we heard the crowd again. I could even hear the crowd up here, as they tried to kick those field goals. And home field advantage is huge still in these COVID years. And to think that A&M's 4-1 after what we talked about after the Vanderbilt game,
right?
And I'm just sitting here and thinking how this team has changed because people wanted Mond out. The offensive line still, Cessna would say, you guys are horrible. There were so many things. The defense didn't show up early. You think about that Vanderbilt game, and here we are. They're at least coming number 8 in the country again at 4-1, halfway point, and you're thinking like, wow, they should only get better. I mean, all teams should get better, but A&M being so young, and now, like you said, Jones just coming back, he's going to get more reps. A&M looked pretty healthy tonight. Did anybody see anybody get hurt?
No. Isaiah Spiller was a little in and out, but he finished the game just fine. For 2 straight weeks, and something to keep your eye on, but I don't think it's going to turn into anything. Ryan McCollum, center.
Good point.
He came up a little gimpy a couple times at Mississippi State, but powered through, and you kind of didn't notice it as the game went on. There was a couple of plays where Ryan McCollum really was bent over and hurting, but he stayed in the game and he powered through. And by the end of the game, you'd kind of forgotten that it happened. So he seems to be quite the grinder and fighting through some of those little bangs and bruises.
Good point, because the announcers mentioned him, how valuable he is. Jimbo mentioned how much. And last year we all talked about, even though Prater come in and did a great job last year, that was supposed to be McCollum's job last year. So I think, once again, I'm not a no-line coach, but what all those people tell me, I think he's been a huge addition this year.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go with this, because you mentioned moving forward, A&M 4-1, quite the reversal from where everything was after that Vanderbilt game. You're an AP voter. You had Michigan and Oklahoma State lose ahead of A&M this week. Where do you roughly estimate A&M might be moving forward this week?
I think Michigan was like 13. I don't think Michigan was ahead.
Okay.
But and Oklahoma State might have been ahead. I had A&M 7th in my ballot last week. And when you look at it, there's not anybody now. The big 3, we all know the big 3, Ohio State. When you look at Clemson, the way they are, and Alabama. But to me, you can make an argument that every time A&M wins a game, they get closer to that 4th spot. Because let's be honest, if they go 9-1, they're going to be in the running. I mean, we know that. They're going to be in the running for the college football playoff. And who would have thought that we've been mentioning that. Last time we kind of mentioned that, they went to Mississippi State and laid an egg against 3-5 Bulldogs. But every game they win, they're going to get a game closer to that. Now, how do they handle that as young guys? And I know they got veteran coaches and all that, and it's hard, the outside distraction. They don't go to class anymore. They're online, so, they are in a bubble a little bit. But you can tell Kirk Bowles was here tonight. He's an AP voter. A lot of people in the country read his column, whatever. And you can tell he asked a lot of questions to the players. Do you feel like a top 10 team? Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to be asked. That's where they're at now. I think this game solidified that because it's the halfway point. You're at the halfway point, so it's like, okay, let's look who's for real. Well, A&M's for real. Now, how long are they going to be for real?
A&M at number 8. You're right, Michigan. I was corrected on that. They're number 13, but Oklahoma State lost at number 6. And number 7 ahead of them is Cincinnati, who jumped them because of a good win against an undefeated SMU. But it'll be interesting to see where A&M ranks around Cincinnati then. Then you have Notre Dame, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson.
Now that they got Ezekiel Jones back, my buddy, I mean, you got to think about. But, I always laugh when people talk to me. I get a lot of emails about my AP votes because people care, their fans. And I always say, like, it'll all play itself out. I mean, if you keep winning, people are going to pay attention to you. It don't matter if you're BYU or what have you. You keep winning games, because now A&M's going to even get more recognition, believe it or not, I believe, when you go on the road. They're going on the road for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. You win these next 2 games, you're going to get more respect, because you go on the road, different parts. All the Arkansas people are going to go back and say, hey, A&M is every bit as good as Georgia. I guarantee it. They're going to say, if A&M played Georgia, it'd be a toss-up game, because we firmly believe that. Now, Arkansas people believe that as well. So 2 weeks ahead, to me, opportunity knocks.
That Tennessee game is actually probably going to be a pretty important one, because Tennessee, a tough place to play. Little up and down, but has done some stuff this year.
Now, what's interesting is, I didn't think about it until I listened to the announcer. Tennessee plays Arkansas next week. Mm-hmm. So then the following week, A&M goes to Tennessee. So you do have to start looking at those things, because we even talked today, was it better for LSU to win today or better for Auburn to win today? Because you got to play both those teams, and for A&M to get to where they want to be, they have to beat both those teams. Right. But we're talking about that, though. Never would have thought we'd be talking about that after Vanderbilt.
You're right. Here's one more stat that I kind of pulled up as I was scrolling through everything, just to kind of leave it off with interesting fact. Arkansas, 27.3% on third down conversions. Their average distance to go was 9.6 yards, which is good on the defense, that they had them backed up a lot. Now, the interesting thing is A&M 63.6% on third downs. Their average down distance to go was 7.8. So it's not like they were converting on a lot of third and shorts. They were having to make some passes.
Yeah, I wrote down notes. They picked up like 3rd and 12, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, because once again, Mon got time, and which ties into the offensive line. I forgot this. Now, I will throw a little bit of cold water on this. When you looked at Arkansas stats, they were all bad except for turnovers. They were only converting 33% of third downs coming in. This Arkansas is not a great team with numbers, but after watching them play, you can see why they're doing so well, because they play hard and they're well coached. Mm-hmm. If you play hard and well coached. So I thought this was a big win, and because Arkansas has vastly improved, and A&M took care of business.
And turnovers can skew numbers a lot. So, and of course, we know
no turnovers. I thought that was just so huge. Mm-hmm. 0 turnovers. And that tells me that A&M had a focused bye week. We didn't see a lot of bobbles. We didn't see a lot of bad snaps. Like I said, and I always have to laugh. Mon threw 26 balls. You throw 26 balls, you're probably going to throw 2 that could be intercepted. Now, will they be intercepted? That's why those guys are on defense. So you got to take the good with the bad. Yeah. And right now, there's a lot of good to take about A&M football.
I keep thinking of things like there was a lot to this game.
There was.
It had layers. And one more, and it's something we can discuss and talk about further, but interesting to see what they were doing on third down. They kind of brought back that dime package, but moved it around, because in the sense that they put 3 men up front, and all 3 of those guys were defensive ends with Leal in the middle.
I'm always interested in the defensive coaches these days, because he's right what they did. I was amazed at how Arkansas tried to hide the way they brought pressure. Sometimes they brought a linebacker, but whatever they did most of the time didn't work. And then I'm thinking, okay, I got to give A&M credit, but it's still Arkansas. Arkansas is not an elite team in the SEC. And now you're going to play 2 more teams that are coached by defensive gurus. Now, whether they have the people to do it or whatever. So these next 2 matchups will continue to be good, because Jimbo's an offensive guy, and he knows both these guys as well. So this is going to be very entertaining games coming up against South Carolina and Tennessee.
Do we forget anything? I think
we covered.
I think that's it.
Everything. Now, if I could only make deadline, my editors would love me.
There you go. Well, everyone, thanks so much for chatting with us, for watching with us, or if you're watching on demand, hanging with us at this late hour. we got to get out of here, but be sure to check theeagle.com, aggiesports.com, myaggienation.com for all of our recaps, write-ups, grades, and everything, and as well as videos of Jimbo Fisher and all the players that spoke today to get ready for a big road test at South Carolina next week. So thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back this week with some more Zoom hangouts, some more chances to talk a little bit of Aggie football, and we'll see you then.